You would have seen, and I think probably felt, how much more violence and how much more crime there is in our society since the end of the pandemic. And so much of that is also because of what appears to be the weakness in the police. Official figures show around only 15% of murders in this country are ever solved. To put it another way, 85% of murders go unsolved. The murderer gets away with it. At the same time, we're seeing serious incidents of what may amount to the politicization of the police service. Just 10 days ago, the deputy head of the Crime Intelligence Unit of the police, Major General Feroz Khan, attended the gala dinner of the Economic Freedom Fighters. He claimed he was there working. It appears someone bought him a ticket for the event. Ivor Chipkin is the director of the New South Institute. They've issued a new report about this. Ivor, good afternoon to you, and thanks for coming in.
Thanks.
We spend a huge amount of money on our police service every year. We have a very large number of officers per head of population, and despite that, we see increasing rates of violent crime. Why are we not actually seeing the results of all of this money?
Well, we're probably not spending as much as we should be spending, or we're not spending the right amount. We're not spending the money in the right places. So what we've definitely seen over the last 10 years or so, even longer, is an absolute decline of the number of policemen that you and I would require in our day-to-day life to sort of make our neighborhood safer. So the number of policemen on the streets is declining, which is astonishing. The kinds of everyday aggressions in our neighborhoods, the violence in our streets, etc., those are precisely the issues where you need sort of everyday policemen. The constables on the street, those are the policemen which have fewer and fewer of. Instead, what we're seeing, and you see that generally across the police, it has variations in various police stations, etc. So that's the first thing. The second thing, which is also incredible, is that there's a decline in spending on the infrastructure of policing, the kinds of things that policemen need in order to do their jobs effectively, vehicles, infrastructure in police stations. So many of our police stations are so dilapidated precisely because there's been a decline in capital spending on infrastructure. But police also lack in their police stations, not just vehicles, fingerprint kits, all the sort of basic necessities that you need, which is why sometimes when you're calling a police station or when you're appearing at a police station, they simply lack the basic goods or infrastructure needed to do their jobs. And it's in those circumstances that when there's a sense that there's a shift in the balance of power between criminals and the police are backing down because they simply lack the means to confront organized criminals with high-powered weaponry.
Where's all the money going then? And I hate to ask this question. Is it all going to the VIP protection unit? It can feel like that.
Well, a lot of the money does go to the VIP protection unit. I mean, it's small relative to the total budget of the police, but there are two areas where the police budget has been growing. One is remuneration for the senior leadership, and some of that is a sort of incremental growth per year, but some of it is definite, huge, large increases to the salaries of generals and brigadiers, and I think that speaks to sort of the priorities are. But the other one, which is also astonishing, one of the areas of real growth in police spending is in the VIP units. So those thugs which we saw attached to the deputy president beating up people on the streets, money's been going to them. But there's something else very disturbing around the VIP spending. What the Zondo Commission suggested, evidence that was laid before the Zondo Commission suggested, was that some of those units that were sent to Russia and China for military training, ostensibly to provide a kind of paramilitary in the service of the Jacob Zuma administration, and who seemed to have been or potentially implicated in the July 2021 uprising. Some of the funding for those deployments came from VIP services. So there you have a profoundly politicized element of the police serving dangerously undemocratic forces, but also quite nefarious purposes as well.
It's a bit like in Cartergate all over again. I mean, from the 1990s. One of the strange things, which you've already alluded to, is the number of detectives seems to have dropped dramatically. And they're the ones who are supposed to solve crimes. I mean, that's why if someone murdered me today, they would have an 85% chance of literally getting away with it. I mean, surely detective services, we should spend as much money as we can in.
Crime intelligence was captured. Remember the Mgluli and the story and the sagas around crime intelligence. So a key instrument of policing captured and not so much underfunded, but captured and turned away from dealing and focusing on crime towards pursuing political opposition. Detective services massively underfunded. So the number of cases which every detective in South Africa has to deal with is just astronomical and growing, which is why they just simply can't get through their work through loads, and why we're seeing in the press reports of deep despondency amongst the detectives, and many are leaving the services.
Police crime intelligence, I mean, after Richard and Mdluli left and after all of the court cases and after everything that changed and I suppose the political change, that's supposed to then start to rehabilitate itself. Is there any evidence that it's actually performing the job it's supposed to?
Well, I think the July 2021 uprising is a strong indicator of that it hadn't by 2021. And I see no strong evidence that anything fundamental has shifted since then. So I suspect that the key intelligence function of the police continues to be very, very weak. There might be some incremental changes, but I think the biggest issue for us, and I think it's some distance away from often where the policy discussion is, which is focused very much on building trust between the police and communities and on better resourcing the police. I think all of those things are really, really important. But for us, what we think is the single most important factor affecting policing in South Africa is the politicization of the leadership of the police. So there are many thousands of decent policemen in the services trying to do their jobs where they just simply don't have the resources. But we've argued that structurally, the way in which the police is organized and the way, particularly in the way it's funded, it is not focused on dealing with crime and the kinds of what we call social emergencies, the kinds of issues which you and I in our neighborhoods and in poor neighborhoods and in working neighborhoods affect people on an everyday basis. That's simply not what the police is focused on. We think increasingly the police has become, especially since the years of state capture, the police is largely focused on managing, becoming partisan too, involved in extraordinary contestation within the ruling party itself.
I mean, the idea that the deputy head of the Crime Intelligence Service can attend a dinner, I mean, firstly, I don't think a senior officer like that would be working during an operation, and secondly, I don't think they'll be sitting down to dinner if they were. I mean, what signal does that send?
Well, I think as you're saying, I mean, this extraordinary relationship between our senior police and politicians. It's not just structurally that the Commissioner of Police is appointed by the President, an unusual situation. So structurally there's the politicization of the police leadership. But then obviously the police culture is such that it is appropriate to mingle with and be associated with politicians and political parties. It's an outrageous and unseemly situation.
We have a situation where our politics may be about to change or may not, but if we look at what could happen in elections next year, when a governing party comes under pressure, one of the things that can happen is that they feel more accountable. In other words, they respond more to the needs of voters to stay in power. That's how democracies are supposed to work. Could that play a role in depoliticizing the police? We could have a political party one day, fearing power, that decides the only way to survive that is to make sure that there's a completely apolitical police service for when they're in opposition.
So I think and this is where, there's sort of lots of gloom in the current situation, but actually there are a couple of very, very green shoots which are rising. And one of those is around in the civil service. There's quite dramatic reforms in progress, which you and I have discussed previously, around depoliticizing the civil service, or at least appropriately politicizing it. And I think one of the driving factors is around precisely that the ruling party is suddenly awake to the idea that opposition parties could enjoy the similar kinds of control of their public administration that it currently enjoys. And I think that's a scary thought. But also I think nobody wants unstable political coalitions to enjoy the kind of control over the civil service which the ANC currently enjoys. So I think that is definitely an impetus for reform, perhaps, and hopefully it will be an impetus for reform in the police as well. But I do say to the media and generally, the space of public service reform is incredibly dynamic. It's enormously important that the current 4 reforms that are on the agenda now, we manage to get over the line, legislative line, hopefully by the end of the year. They could be potential game changers, not just for the civil service generally, but also for the police.
Ivor Chipkin, thank you, Director at the New South Institute. Really do appreciate the time today.